I've looked at quite a few different companies that have either made or published games for the Atari 2600 over the last few years. When I usually start these projects, I ask myself, what is this, and who made it? That normally gets me started and leads me to a whole bunch of other questions that I probably want to ask, or lets me know if something's just not going to interest me. This time, I fell down a rabbit hole where I kept finding strange things, and I just didn't really find a bottom to it. This is the rather bizarre mystery of Froggo Games. They published and possibly developed video games for the Atari 2600 and 7800, but I would honestly question that, as many of their games are just ROM hacks of earlier video games that were released by other companies that you probably never heard of. They're a weird company, and let's just get into this, because I was really confused going through this stuff. Finding a list of their games was actually pretty easy. Every source that I found, they mentioned 6 games that were released on the Atari 2600 and 2 games that were released on the 7800. Something is interesting about the 2600 games and probably matches what is on the 7800 games. These were likely licensed from other companies, or they were cloned and hacked without that company knowing about it. I would like to believe that Froggo licensed the games and then just changed some of the coding to make graphical changes, but I might be a bit naive on that one. But I would still like to assume that they didn't do something wrong, even if it is just a bunch of 2600 games that were largely abandoned by 1988. That is when many of these games were actually released. Froggo was not around very long, but they picked up in the late 80s. It actually looks like Froggo used the same manufacturer as Activision, especially when they were making their cartridges, because those cartridges are exactly the same. The only difference is on the back, where the Activision name was removed and replaced with just a black rectangle. It's a little odd. I'm not exactly sure why this happened, or how they got the stock for this, or if it was just them finding the company and the company having extra cartridges that they wanted to get rid of. Anything is really possible at this point. I couldn't find any clear indication of what was going on here. It's just another odd thing that happened. So, they found a manufacturer that used that Activision used, and they got a lot of stock, probably on the cheap. So getting back to their games really quick, they either licensed or hacked the games from a few different companies. The ones that I found were Parker Brothers, Panda, Spectravision, and Ultravision. There are others out there that I just did not find or wasn't entirely sure about. There were 6 games on the Atari 2600 that were released and are attributed to Froggo, at least on the Atari 2600. These were all released in 1988, and this felt really odd to me, but that's just what all the sources told me. And then when I looked at the 7800 games, those are also listed as being released in 1988. So this little company came out of nowhere and pumped out 8 games in 1 year, which seemed odd until I found out many of these are just graphical changes from other games. So that kind of made more sense, because they really didn't have to program anything. I started to wonder if this was like a one-man operation or not, and it probably would have been an extremely busy person doing all of that, because he had to manage the marketing, the manufacturing, and whatever developer he had to hack the different cartridges to create something that looked like a new game. I'm assuming he had developers, because all of that in the span of a year was probably going to be way too much for one person. So Froggo published Task Force, Karate, Seahawk, Sea Hunt, Spideroid, and Cruise Missile on the Atari 2600. These are all pretty much what you would expect from an Atari game. They're not going to be amazing, they're mostly arcade experiences, and they can be fun for a little while. From what I found, there were 6 planned games for the Atari 7800. 2 of those games were released, Tank Commander and Water Ski, and then there were 4 games that were not released. Those were Night of the Ninja, Pyromania, UFO, and Scorpion Squad. I'm not really sure about any of this. I'm just going off of what I've found on the internet, so there might be more. This list might be a little inaccurate. You never really know. Some of these games were actually advertised in the May to June 1989 issue of Atarian magazine. I'll talk more about that once I get into the actual advertising stuff. So, yeah, let's just get into that right now. There were a lot of places to advertise video games in the 1980s. When I looked up Zonix a while back, I found a bunch of advertisements, some of them in the Boy Scouts official magazine. This isn't where I would normally look, but hey, it just shows that these things are going to pop up in weird places that you might not think about. So I did mention the Atarian magazine that I looked up. This was a hobbyist magazine that was not around for very long, but it is where Froggo put a pretty big advertisement in it. From here, I checked some of the bigger places where I would probably expect to see, something about video games. These included the Sears Christmas Wish Book. I looked from 1988 to 1989, and then also into the 1990s for something that I will talk about a little bit later. The Atari 7800 is in both of those books, but I didn't see anything from Froggo. There were no games included in there or anything like that. These books are almost 700 pages each, and so there's a chance that I missed something in there. I did look through most of them. I obviously skipped some stuff that had nothing to do with video games, though. When I checked the Toys R Us catalog from 1988 and 1989, I didn't see anything, and I couldn't find anything from, their 1989 to 1990 English source. So yeah, that was just a major frustrating part to all of this. When I checked JCPenney's Christmas catalogs for 88, 89, and also 1990, I did not see them at all. There were Atari 7800 games advertised. Their presence was much smaller than Nintendo's, and I didn't see anything about what I'm going to talk about in just a little bit. They had released 2 controllers, and those came out for the NES. That is just a whole nother can of worms, and that's what I'm going to get into next, because that was a whole nother layer of frustration that I wanted to get into. I don't know. This company is just very annoying. So what do we know about these 2 controllers? They were definitely released for the Nintendo Entertainment System. One of them was wireless, and the other one was a wired controller. Both of them had turbo buttons. These were 2 of the many, and I mean many, controllers that were released for the NES. There's a lot of them out there, and these just happen to blend in with all of the others. I couldn't find any advertisements for these controllers. That isn't unheard of, as many controllers didn't get advertisements, at least not where you would expect. It seems like every company would develop a controller or copy someone else's design. The wireless controllers look like they use the same technology as the NES Super Scope, which many companies used. I tried to look up reviews for these controllers, but I didn't find anything from the time. Again, that's not completely unheard of. Things like this just seem to be kind of lost to time, and if it weren't for the internet, then we would not know about them. Froggo controllers aren't really historically significant, but they are kind of a cool oddity. I wonder if Froggo would have released games for the NES, but that is just something that we're not really going to know. I could have also called this section, "Here are a whole bunch of things that might be true, but we are never going to know." In 1989, Froggo appears to have ceased operation. There is some speculation that Atari would have helped to fund the development of more games, but they pulled the plug and that pretty much ended Froggo. I could not find an actual source for that. There was one article that was posted in like the 2000s. This is not really a very good article. It provides nothing of really value, at least from my perspective. It doesn't give a source for any of its information. There really aren't any quotes on it. There's nothing that would lead me to think that this was actually a thing. And that's kind of my problem with a lot of the information around Froggo. There are a lot of posts on Atari forums, and while I'm inclined to believe that they could be true, it's one of those things where I don't really know, because the person is either recounting some of the memories that they have, or they're saying they heard it from someone else, and there's just no way to really source that. And I like to believe everyone is telling the truth, but you just never know, and so getting concrete information is just not really a thing that you can do in some of these cases. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there, and I just can't find any information to really corroborate it. So yeah, it's just one of those strange things. Froggo was an incorporated company in California, and there are documents available to that online. If you are so inclined, you can create an account with opencorporates.com, and you can see when the company was dissolved, and the two names that are attached to the company. That was about as far as I was willing to go. I didn't feel like really tracking those two people down to see what happened with it or what their involvement with the company was. That's something someone else can do. Now let's just wrap all this up and... yeah, let's just wrap this up and move on. Froggo is just a weird company. It seems like one of the zombie brands that slapped its name on things and didn't really do a whole lot. That doesn't really tell the whole story, though. They tried to advertise their games, they might have employed programmers, and they manufactured several products. Those products weren't very good, but, they still were released. I think they were an underfunded company. They might have been something if they had licensed better games, and if they had tried to put out stuff on the NES, that probably would have worked out a little bit better for them. The controllers didn't really help Froggo. I couldn't find advertisements for them, and the information on them is pretty scarce. They did exist, from what I can see. Nintendo didn't license them, though, so they didn't have that seal of quality, which may or may not actually mean anything, but they did in fact exist. This is one of the companies that's really mysterious. They showed up, pumped out a whole bunch of games, and then just went away. There are a lot of rumors about them. There are a lot of rumors about the person who ran the company. There's a lot of just weird stuff about it. You can definitely fall down a very interesting rabbit hole by just going through the Atari Age posts about Froggo, or going to one of the other Atari forums and just looking up Froggo Games. It's a cool trip to go down. Unfortunately, there's just not a whole lot that really can be confirmed. It's ultimately where this story ends. The company existed, then they disappeared, and now there's just a whole bunch of rumors about them online, which might be true, might not be true, but they make for a rather interesting story if you keep an open mind about it. Anyway, that's going to wrap things up. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you have any more information about Froggo or any of the things that I've looked at so far, please put those in the comments. I really enjoy reading that stuff. I'll talk to you all later. Bye.